The silver ships came down from the sky like falling stars. Commander Taman watched from his command vessel as 3 smaller craft broke away from his main fleet and descended toward the human colony. The planet below looked peaceful and green, with small cities scattered across the continents like toys. It would be an easy conquest. Taman adjusted his dark blue uniform and checked his weapons. His tall, lean frame moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. His pale skin had the slight shimmer that marked him as one of the hegemony elite, and his large black eyes could see much more than human vision allowed. Most importantly, his mind could reach into the thoughts of lesser beings and bend them to his will. "Commander, we are ready for landing," reported his aide through the communication device. "Good. Remember, this is just a formality. These humans will surrender once they see our power. They always do." Taman had conquered 12 worlds in his career. Each time, the primitive species had either fled in terror or begged for mercy within hours. Humans would be no different. According to his reports, they were barely capable of spaceflight and had no real weapons to speak of. This would be the easiest victory yet. The landing craft touched down in a wide field outside the main human settlement. Taman emerged with 6 of his best soldiers, their energy weapons gleaming in the alien sunlight. The humans had built their colony around a cluster of low white buildings that looked sturdy but simple. Nothing impressive, nothing threatening. A small group of humans waited for them near the largest building. Taman smiled to himself. At least they had the sense to meet him, rather than make him hunt them down. As his party approached, Taman studied the humans with mild curiosity. They looked exactly as his files described: short creatures with brown or pale skin, small eyes, and no visible natural weapons. Weak and soft, like most of the species the hegemony had absorbed over the centuries. The human in front was a woman with long black hair tied back in a simple style. She wore plain gray clothes that looked like some kind of uniform. Her face was calm, almost peaceful, and her eyes were closed as if she were resting. Behind her stood several other humans, both men and women, all wearing similar gray clothing. Taman stopped a few meters away and activated his translation device. When he spoke, his words would come out in whatever crude language these creatures used. "I am Commander Taman of the Galactic Hegemony 3rd Fleet. You will identify yourself and prepare for the transfer of authority over this world." The woman opened her eyes slowly and looked at him with a slight smile. "I am Director Jisoo of the New Busan Colonial Authority. Welcome to our world, Commander." Her voice was calm and steady. No fear, no trembling. Taman frowned slightly. Usually primitive species showed some sign of terror when faced with hegemony forces. Perhaps these humans were simply too stupid to understand the danger they were in. "Director Jisoo," Taman said, putting a slight emphasis on her strange name. "Your species has been selected for integration into the hegemony. This process will go smoothly if you cooperate. Resist and your people will suffer." "I appreciate your offer," Jisoo replied, still smiling that small, peaceful smile. "But we must respectfully decline." Taman stared at her. In 12 conquests, no one had ever declined. They begged, they negotiated, they tried to buy time, but they never simply said no. "I do not think you understand the situation," he said, his voice becoming harder. "The hegemony does not make offers. We give orders. You will surrender this world and submit to our authority." "I understand perfectly," Jisoo said. Her eyes had closed again, and she seemed to be concentrating on something. "But our answer remains the same." Taman felt his patience running thin. He glanced at the humans standing behind the woman. There were 6 of them, 3 men and 3 women. They stood quietly, not moving or speaking. One of the men had scars on his face and arms. A woman had what looked like metal parts attached to her left arm, though Taman could not imagine what purpose they served. He almost laughed. These were supposed to be her bodyguards or soldiers. They looked pathetic. "You think these petty beasts behind you can protect you from the might of the hegemony," Taman said, gesturing dismissively at the quiet humans. "Look at them. They do not even carry weapons. They stand there like animals waiting for slaughter. The man with scars looked at him with dark eyes but said nothing. The woman with the metal arm kept her gaze straight ahead. None of them moved or reacted to his insults. "Your people are weak," Taman continued, warming to his subject. "You have no real technology, no psychic abilities, no natural defenses. You are barely more advanced than the creatures we use for labor on our agricultural worlds. What could you possibly do against us?" Jisoo still had her eyes closed. "We have our ways. Your ways," Taman repeated mockingly. "What ways could you possibly have? You cannot even build proper weapons. Your ships are crude and slow. Your cities are small and defenseless. You are nothing but a minor annoyance that we will sweep aside." Activated his psychic abilities and reached toward Jisoo's mind, intending to plant the seeds of fear and submission that would make her more cooperative. But as his mental probe approached her thoughts, something unexpected happened. It was like running into a wall. Her mind was protected somehow, shielded in a way he had never encountered. Taman frowned and tried again, pushing harder. Still, nothing. The woman's mind remained closed to him, as solid and impenetrable as stone. Behind Jisoo, one of the men stepped forward slightly. Taman heard a soft sound like air escaping from something under pressure, a hiss that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound made his skin crawl. His enhanced senses, which had served him so well in countless battles, suddenly screamed danger. Every instinct he possessed told him to run, to call for immediate backup, to get as far away from this place as possible. His heart stopped cold as the realization hit him. These were not helpless primitives. These were not weak creatures waiting to be conquered. Something was very, very wrong here. And that was the moment Jisoo stirred. Her eyes opened fully for the first time since he had arrived, and Taman found himself looking into a gaze that held intelligence, calculation, and something else that made his blood freeze in his veins. Predator's eyes. The woman who had seemed so peaceful and harmless was looking at him the way a hunter looks at prey. Behind her, the 6 humans he had dismissed as petty beasts were all watching him with the same expression. Waiting. Jisoo rose from her position with a grace that made Taman's breath catch. Her movements were fluid and controlled, like those of a trained warrior, rather than a simple colonial administrator. The peaceful expression she had worn moments before was gone, replaced by focused alertness that spoke of years of combat experience. "You seem surprised, Commander," she said, her voice now carrying an edge that had not been there before. "Did you think we would simply roll over and accept your rule without question?" Taman took an involuntary step backward. The soft hissing sound continued around him, and he realized it was coming from devices worn by the humans behind Jisoo. Small machines attached to their belts and shoulders were releasing some kind of gas or energy field into the air. "What is that sound?" he demanded, trying to regain his composure. "What are those devices?" "Stasis field generators," replied the man with the scars on his face. His voice was deep and calm. "We call them sleep pods. They help us stay ready. For situations like this one." Taman stared at him. Stasis technology was advanced science that only a few species in the galaxy had mastered. Humans were not supposed to possess anything like it. "That is impossible," he said. "Your species barely understands space travel. You cannot have developed stasis technology on your own." The woman with the metal arm smiled for the first time since his arrival. When she moved her left hand, Taman could see that the metal parts were not crude attachments, but sophisticated cybernetic enhancements that moved as naturally as flesh and bone. "We did not develop it on our own," she said. Her name, he learned later, was Nara. "We learned it from studying the wreckage of hegemony ships that attacked our other colonies." "Other colonies?" Taman felt a chill run down his spine. "What other colonies?" Jisoo gestured toward the building behind her. "Please, Commander, let us continue this conversation inside. I think you will find what we have to show you very interesting." Taman looked around at his 6 soldiers. They seemed nervous now, their weapons still ready but their confidence clearly shaken. The humans outnumbered them, and something about the situation felt like a trap closing around them. "My men stay armed," He said, "Of course," Jisoo agreed. "Though I should warn you that your energy weapons will not function properly while our stasis fields are active. The electromagnetic interference disrupts their power cells." One of Taemin's soldiers, a young officer named Korvek, checked his weapon. His face went pale as he saw the power indicator flickering weakly. "Commander," he whispered. "She is right. My weapon is losing power." Taemin felt panic beginning to build in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He was an officer of the hegemony. He had faced dangerous situations before. These were still just humans, regardless of what tricks they might have learned. "Very well," he said. "Lead the way." The inside of the building was not what Taemin had expected. Instead of primitive human furniture and decorations, he found himself in a sophisticated command center, filled with displays and control panels that looked disturbingly familiar. The technology was clearly based on hegemony designs, but it had been modified and improved in ways he did not recognize. "Welcome to our primary intelligence center," Jisoo said, moving to stand beside a large screen that showed a map of the local star systems. "We have been monitoring hegemony fleet movements for quite some time." The map showed dozens of red dots representing hegemony ships, but there were also blue dots that Taemin had never seen before. The blue dots outnumbered the red ones by almost 3-1. "What are those blue markers?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "Human vessels," replied Hyunwoo, the scarred man. "We have been building our fleet for 20 years, Commander. Every time your people attacked one of our colonies, we learned something new about your technology. Every captured ship gave us more pieces to work with." Taemin stared at the display in growing horror. "That is impossible. Our intelligence reports show that humans have less than 50 ships capable of interstellar travel." "Your intelligence reports are wrong," Jisoo said simply. "We made sure of that." She touched a control, and the display changed to show recorded communications between hegemony intelligence officers. Taemin recognized some of the voices, including his own superior back at fleet headquarters. "We have been feeding false information to your spies for years," Jisoo continued. "Every report they sent back to your command was exactly what we wanted you to believe. You think we are weak and scattered because that is what we needed you to think." The woman with the cybernetic arm, Nara, stepped forward and activated another display. This one showed detailed technical specifications for hegemony weapons and ships, information that should have been classified at the highest levels of their military. "We know how your engines work," she said. "We know the frequencies your shields operate on. We know the range and power output of every weapon in your fleet. We have been studying you, Commander, while you ignored us." Taemin felt like the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. Everything he had believed about this mission, about human capabilities, about his own superiority, was crumbling around him. "But why?" he asked. "If you had this knowledge, this technology, why did you let us attack your colonies? Why did you allow your people to die?" Jisoo's expression became sad for a moment. "Because we needed to understand you completely before we acted. Every attack taught us something about your tactics, your weaknesses, your psychology. The people who died were volunteers, Commander. They knew the risks and accepted them for the greater good." "You used your own people as bait," Taemin whispered. "We used ourselves as teachers," Hyunwoo corrected. "Each colony that fell taught the rest of us how to survive, how to fight back, how to win." Taemin looked around the room again, seeing it with new eyes. The humans working at the various stations were not colonial administrators or simple farmers. They moved with military precision and spoke in technical terms that revealed advanced training. These were soldiers and scientists and intelligence officers who had been preparing for this moment for decades. "Your fleet," he said, his voice barely audible. "Where is your fleet?" Jisoo smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "All around. You, Commander. They have been waiting for you to arrive." Taemin reached for his communication device with shaking hands, but before he could activate it, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. The main display screen flickered to life, showing his fleet in orbit around the planet. But something was very wrong with the image. His ships were surrounded. Vessels that had not been there when he landed now filled the space around his fleet like predators circling wounded prey. The human ships were sleek and dark, almost invisible against the backdrop of space until they chose to reveal themselves. "Captain Minho of the Iron Lotus to New Busan Control," came a voice over the communication system. The speaker was clearly human, but he was using military terminology and procedures that should have been unknown to their species. "Go ahead, Iron Lotus," Jisoo responded, touching a control panel. "All hegemony vessels have been disabled, Director. Their engines are offline and their weapon systems are not responding. No casualties on either side." Taemin stared at the display in disbelief. "How is this possible? My fleet has the most advanced shielding in the galaxy. Your primitive weapons cannot penetrate our defenses." "We did not need to penetrate them," said a new voice. Taemin turned to see another human approaching, a man wearing the insignia of a sergeant. His name tag read Kang Min. "We simply convinced your ship's computers that their own weapons were malfunctioning." "Computer warfare," Nara explained, seeing Taemin's confusion. "We learned your programming languages by studying captured systems. Your ships think they are experiencing critical failures, so they automatically shut down their weapons and engines to prevent damage." Taemin felt his legs grow weak. Computer warfare was a theoretical concept that even hegemony scientists considered too dangerous to attempt. The risk of the attacking program spreading to one's own systems was too great. "But the feedback could destroy your own ships," he protested. "Only if we used your methods," Kangman replied. "We developed better techniques, safer ones, more effective ones." Another human stepped forward, a woman whose uniform marked her as a specialist in detection systems. Her name tag read, Yuna. "We have been tracking your fleet for 3 days, Commander," she told him. "Your cloaking technology is impressive, but it has a weakness. It creates a slight distortion in subspace that our sensors can detect." She activated a display that showed the path Taemin's fleet had taken through space. Every course change, every attempt at concealment, every tactical maneuver was clearly marked on the screen. "We knew exactly when you would arrive and where you would position your ships," Yuna continued. "Captain Minho's task force was waiting in position before you even entered the system." Taemin sank into a nearby chair, his mind reeling. Everything about this situation violated what he knew about human capabilities. They were supposed to be a young species, barely capable of interstellar flight. Yet they had outsmarted his tactical planning, disabled his fleet, and demonstrated technology that rivaled or exceeded hegemony standards. "There is something else you should see," Jisoo said, her voice gentle but implacable. The main display changed again, this time showing what appeared to be surveillance footage from various locations throughout hegemony space. Taemin recognized several of the locations, including the capital world and major military bases. "These images were taken last week," Jisoo explained, "by human intelligence operatives working within your territory." Taemin watched in growing horror as the footage showed humans walking freely through hegemony installations. They wore disguises that made them look like various alien species, but sophisticated analysis revealed their true nature. "Lieutenant, Daeho has been working as a maintenance technician on your homeworld for 8 years, Jisoo continued, indicating a man in the footage who was accessing computer terminals in what Taemin recognized as a classified research facility. "He has provided us with detailed information about your military capabilities and strategic planning." 8 years, Taemin whispered. "Some of our people have been in place even longer," Hyunwoo said. "We began infiltrating hegemony space almost as soon as we achieved interstellar flight. While your scouts were cataloging us as a primitive species, our agents were learning everything they could about your civilization." More footage appeared, showing humans in disguise at military briefings, in government offices, even in the private quarters of high-ranking officials. The scope of the infiltration was staggering. "How many?" Taemin asked, his voice barely audible. "Several thousand," Jisoo replied. "They are scientists, technicians, soldiers, and intelligence officers. They live normal lives within your society, while reporting back to us about your activities and capabilities." Taemin felt physically ill. The hegemony prided itself on its security and its ability to identify potential threats. Yet humans had been moving freely through their most secure installations for years, gathering intelligence and preparing for this moment. But why go to all this trouble, he demanded. If you had this capability, you could have attacked us directly. Why wait? Why allow us to continue believing we were superior? Jisoo exchanged glances with her companions before answering. Because we needed to be certain we could win decisively. A war between our species would be costly for both sides. We preferred to ensure that when conflict became inevitable, it would end quickly with minimal casualties. You mean you were preparing for conquest? Taemin said bitterly. We were preparing for survival, Hyunwoo corrected. The hegemony has absorbed dozens of species over the centuries. We studied your methods and your history. We knew that eventually you would come for us, and we knew that when you did, surrender would mean the end of human independence forever. So we prepared, Nara added. We learned. We planned. We made sure that when you finally decided we were worth your attention, we would be ready. The communication system activated again, and Captain Minho's voice filled the command center. Director, we are receiving surrender requests from several hegemony vessels. What are your orders? Jisoo looked at Taemin for a long moment before responding. Accept their surrenders, Captain. Treat all prisoners according to standard protocols. No reprisals, no unnecessary force. Understood, Director. Taemin stared at her. You are not going to execute us? Commander, Jisoo said softly. We are not like you. We do not conquer for the sake of conquest or kill for the pleasure of killing. We want to live in peace, but we will defend ourselves when necessary. She paused, then added, the question now is what happens next. Your fleet is disabled, and your government will soon learn that their attack has failed. How they respond will determine whether this conflict ends here or spreads throughout the galaxy. Taemin looked around the command center one more time, seeing the efficient professionalism of the humans working there, the advanced technology they had developed in secret, the careful planning that had made his defeat inevitable from the moment he entered the system. He had come here believing he was the hunter stalking helpless prey. Instead, he had walked directly into the web of predators who had been waiting patiently for him to arrive. The hunter had become the hunted, and he had never even seen it coming. Jisoo gestured toward a doorway that Taemin had not noticed before. Would you like to see more of our facilities, Commander? I think it would help you understand the full scope of what we have accomplished here. Taemin followed her, feeling like a man walking to his own execution. His remaining soldiers came behind them, their weapons still useless thanks to the electromagnetic interference from the human stasis fields. He could see the fear and confusion on their faces, emotions that mirrored his own. They descended through several levels beneath the main building, passing through corridors lined with equipment that grew more sophisticated with each floor. Humans in technical uniforms moved purposefully through the passages, nodding respectfully to Jisoo as she passed. This is Engineer Somin, Jisoo said, stopping beside a woman who was working on what appeared to be a hegemony engine core. She leads our reverse engineering division. Somin looked up from her work and smiled at Taemin. Commander, you will be interested to know that this engine came from one of your heavy cruisers. We captured it intact during your attack on the Kepler colony 3 years ago. Taemin remembered that battle. The hegemony had lost a single ship to what they believed was a lucky shot from primitive human weapons. The loss had been considered insignificant. We have been studying it ever since, Somin continued. Your people build excellent engines, but they have some design flaws that we have been able to improve upon. She gestured to a bank of displays showing technical specifications. Our version is 17% more efficient and produces 30% more power. That is impossible, one of Taemin's soldiers said. Hegemony engineering is the most advanced in the galaxy. Somin's smile widened. Your engineering is very good, she agreed. But it is also conservative. You rarely try new approaches or experimental techniques. We have been more willing to take risks. They moved deeper into the facility, and Taemin saw more evidence of human technological advancement. Laboratories filled with equipment he did not recognize. Workshops where human technicians were building devices that looked like nothing in his experience. And testing chambers where new weapons and defensive systems were being evaluated. Doctor, Wanho, Jisoo called to a man in a white coat who was studying data on a large screen. Would you show the commander our psychological research? Dr. Wanho turned toward them with the enthusiasm of a scientist eager to discuss his work. Certainly, Director, Commander. We have been conducting extensive studies of hegemony psychology and behavior patterns. He activated a display that showed detailed analysis of various alien species that made up the hegemony. Taemin recognized his own people among them, along with dozens of others. We have identified key psychological weaknesses in each member species, Dr. Wanho explained. Overconfidence in superior technology, rigid adherence to established tactics, inability to adapt quickly to unexpected situations, and most importantly, a tendency to underestimate opponents who appear technologically inferior. You have been studying us like laboratory animals, Taemin said, his voice hollow. Yes, Dr. Wanho agreed without any apparent shame. Just as you studied the species you conquered before us. The difference is that we learned more effectively from our research. They continued through the facility, and Taemin met more humans whose work revealed the depth of their preparation. Communications specialist Sunho showed him intercepted hegemony transmissions going back decades, complete with decoded messages that revealed strategic planning and military movements. We have been monitoring your communications since we first achieved interstellar flight, Sunho explained. Your encryption methods are sophisticated, but they rely on mathematical principles that we were able to figure out with sufficient computer processing power. How much do you know? Taemin asked, dreading the answer. Everything, Sunho replied simply. Fleet movements, strategic plans, political discussions, personal communications between high-ranking officials. We know about the internal conflicts within your government, the resource shortages you are trying to hide, and the other species that are beginning to question hegemony rule. Taemin felt the last of his composure cracking. The hegemony's strength depended on the belief that they were invincible and all-knowing. If humans possessed detailed knowledge of their internal problems and strategic weaknesses, that advantage was gone. The tour continued, and each new revelation struck Taemin like a physical blow. Scout Ji-won presented evidence that several high-ranking hegemony officials were actually human agents using sophisticated disguise technology. The holographic displays showed before and after images of humans who had undergone surgical and technological modifications to appear as various alien species. Agent Kato has been serving as an advisor to your military command for 6 years, Ji-won explained, indicating an image of a human who had been modified to look like one of Taemin's own species. He has provided us with detailed information about your strategic planning and helped us predict your likely responses to various scenarios. How many? Taemin whispered. 43 in positions of significant influence, Ji-won replied, including 2 members of the Hegemony High Council. Taemin sat down heavily on a nearby bench, his mind reeling. The High Council was the supreme governing body of the hegemony, consisting of the most powerful and trusted leaders from each member species. If humans had infiltrated even that level of government, then nothing in hegemony space was secure. Your entire political structure has been compromised, Jisoo said gently. We know about every major decision before it is officially announced. We have influenced policy discussions to encourage the very overconfidence that led you to attack us today. You manipulated us into this war, Taemin realized. We guided you toward a confrontation that was inevitable, Jisoo corrected. The hegemony has never encountered a species it did not eventually try to absorb. We simply chose the time and place where that attempt would occur. The final stop on their tour was a vast chamber filled with star maps and strategic displays. The wall showed the entire galaxy, with different colors indicating various territories and spheres of influence. Taemin was shocked to see that human-controlled space was far larger than any hegemony intelligence report had suggested. We have been colonizing worlds for over a century, Jisoo explained, but we have been very careful to make our expansion appear random and uncoordinated. Your scouts cataloged us as a species of nomadic refugees rather than a growing civilization. How many worlds? Taemin asked. 437, replied a new voice. Taman turned to see a human wearing the insignia of a fleet admiral. I am Admiral Sungmin, commander of the Human Colonial Defense Force. Taman stared at him. 400 worlds? That would make you one of the largest civilizations in the galaxy. The third largest, actually, Admiral Sungmin confirmed, behind the hegemony and the collective. But our military technology is more advanced than either of them. The Admiral activated a display showing human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. There were thousands of ships organized into battle groups that were already in position around key hegemony worlds. We have been preparing for this day for decades, Commander, Admiral Sungmin continued. Every scenario has been planned for. Every possible hegemony response has been anticipated. Your government can choose to negotiate for peace, or they can face a war they cannot win. Taman looked around the command center, seeing the confident faces of humans who had spent their entire adult lives preparing for this moment. They were not the primitive refugees his reports had described. They were a spacefaring civilization that had been patiently building strength while allowing their enemies to underestimate them. We have been fools, he said quietly. You have been overconfident, Jisoo replied. It is a common failing among successful species. You defeated so many enemies that you stopped considering the possibility that one of them might learn from your victories and find ways to turn your own strengths against you. Taman understood now why Director Jisoo had seemed so calm when he first arrived. She had not been afraid because she had known exactly how this encounter would end. His fleet had been defeated before it ever entered the system, his weapons neutralized before he ever drew them, his assumptions shattered by an enemy who had studied him far more carefully than he had studied them. The web had been woven around the hegemony for decades, and they had walked into it willingly, believing themselves to be the spiders rather than the flies. The first reports reached Hegemony High Command within hours of Taman's capture. Admiral Sungmin had allowed one of the disabled hegemony ships to restore limited communications, ensuring that news of the defeat would spread quickly through their command structure. Taman watched from the human command center as panic spread through hegemony space. Intercepted communications showed fleet commanders demanding explanations, government officials arguing about appropriate responses, and military analysts struggling to understand how an entire battle group could be neutralized by a species they had classified as primitive. Your leaders are not taking this well, Jisoo observed, listening to a recorded conversation between two Hegemony High Council members. They cannot accept that we were wrong about human capabilities, Taman replied. His voice carried the exhaustion of a man whose entire worldview had collapsed. The hegemony has built its power on the belief that we are superior to all other species. If that belief is false, then everything we have accomplished is meaningless. On the main display, Admiral Sungmin was coordinating with human fleet commanders throughout the galaxy. What Taman saw there made him feel sick with dread. The humans had not just prepared for a single battle, they had planned for a full-scale war. Captain Jinwoo, what is the status of Operation Lighthouse? Admiral Sungmin asked. All beacons are in position and ready for activation, came the reply from a human ship near the hegemony capital. We can disable communications between all major hegemony worlds within 30 minutes of receiving the order. Excellent. Colonel Haeun, report on Task Force Hammer. Strike teams are in position at 17 key military installations, replied another voice. We can neutralize hegemony fleet command capabilities before they can coordinate a response. Taman listened in growing horror as human military commanders reported their readiness to cripple the hegemony's ability to wage war. They had infiltrators inside major government buildings, sabotage teams positioned at critical infrastructure points, and computer specialists ready to crash the networks that held hegemony civilization together. How long have you been planning this? He asked. Since the day we first encountered your species, Jisoo replied. We learned very quickly that the hegemony does not negotiate with equals, only dominates inferiors. We knew that peaceful coexistence would be impossible unless we could force you to treat us as equals. The communication system crackled to life, and a voice that Taman recognized filled the command center. It was Overlord Valak, the supreme military commander of the hegemony forces and Taemin's direct superior. This is Overlord Velak of the Hegemony High Command to the human forces holding our personnel. You will release them immediately and surrender yourselves for judgment, or face the full military might of our civilization. Admiral Sungmin gestured for Jisoo to respond. She activated the communication system and spoke in a calm, professional tone. This is Director Jisoo of the Human Colonial Alliance. Your personnel are being treated according to established protocols for prisoners of war. They will be released unharmed when hostilities end. There will be no negotiation with rebellious primitives, Velak replied, his voice filled with the same arrogance that Taemin had displayed upon his arrival. You have attacked hegemony forces and will pay the appropriate price. We defended ourselves against an unprovoked attack on our territory, Jisoo corrected. Your forces came to our world with demands for surrender. We declined. The responsibility for what follows lies with your government. You dare to threaten the hegemony? Velak's voice rose in anger. We have crushed 100 species more advanced than yours. You are nothing but animals playing at being civilized. Taemin closed his eyes, recognizing the same contemptuous dismissal he had shown toward humans just hours earlier. Velak was making the exact same mistakes, displaying the same inability to accept that their assumptions might be wrong. Overlord, Jisoo said patiently, we are not threatening you. We are simply prepared to defend ourselves. If you choose to attack us, you will discover that we are not the helpless primitives your intelligence reports suggest. Enough, Velak snarled. I am ordering the immediate mobilization of Battlefleet Prime. You will face the combined might of 300 warships. Let us see how your tricks work against overwhelming force. The communication ended, leaving the command center in silence. Taemin opened his eyes to see the humans around him exchanging glances that mixed resignation with determination. He will not listen, Taemin said quietly. Velak has never been defeated in battle. He cannot conceive of losing to a species he considers inferior. We know, Admiral Sungmin replied. We have detailed psychological profiles of all your senior commanders. Overlord Velak is particularly predictable in his responses to perceived threats. The Admiral activated a strategic display that showed the movement of hegemony forces throughout local space. Battlefleet Prime was indeed mobilizing just as Velak had promised. 300 of the hegemony's most advanced warships were converging on human space. Are you really prepared to fight the entire hegemony military? Taemin asked. We are prepared to defend ourselves, Jisoo corrected. What happens next depends on how far your government is willing to escalate this conflict. Over the following hours, Taemin watched as the situation spiraled beyond anyone's control. Velak's fleet approached human territory with the same confidence that Taemin had felt during his own arrival. But the humans were ready for them. When Battlefleet Prime dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find scattered human colonies, they instead faced a coordinated defense that had been planned for decades. Human ships equipped with advanced jamming technology disrupted hegemony communications. Computer viruses planted by human infiltrators caused critical systems to malfunction at precisely the wrong moments, and weapons designed specifically to counter hegemony defenses tore through their shields as if they were made of paper. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, Battlefleet Prime had been completely destroyed or captured, with minimal casualties. On the human side, Overlord Velak's flagship was among the vessels forced to surrender. 300 ships, Taemin whispered, staring at the tactical display. He lost 300 ships. The price of arrogance, Jisoo said sadly. We tried to warn him, but he would not listen. News of the disaster spread through hegemony space like wildfire. Fleet commanders who had been preparing for their own attacks against human targets suddenly found themselves reconsidering their orders. Government officials who had dismissed humans as a minor threat began demanding emergency sessions to reassess the situation, but for some the lesson came too late. General Hayen's strike teams activated simultaneously across 17 star systems, crippling hegemony military infrastructure before defensive measures could be implemented. Communication networks that had connected their civilization for centuries went dark as human saboteurs activated devices that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Within 72 hours of Taemin's original landing on New Busan, the hegemony's ability to wage coordinated war had been effectively destroyed. Their fleets were scattered and unable to communicate with each other. Their command structures were in chaos. Their most experienced officers were dead or captured. "It is over," Taemin said, watching reports stream in from across hegemony space. "The fighting is over," Jisoo agreed. "But what comes next is up to your people. We can help you rebuild, or we can leave you to face the chaos alone. The choice is yours." Taemin looked around the human command center one final time, seeing the organized efficiency of people who had spent their lives preparing for this moment. They had not wanted this war, but they had been ready for it when it came. And now, having won decisively, they were offering to help their former enemies recover from the consequences of their own arrogance. It was, Taemin realized, exactly what he should have expected from a species that had never been as primitive as they appeared. 6 months after the fall of Battlefleet Prime, Taemin stood in what had once been the Supreme Council chamber of the hegemony. The great hall where his people's leaders had made decisions affecting billions of lives across hundreds of worlds now served a very different purpose. Representatives from dozens of species sat around a circular table, discussing trade agreements and mutual defense pacts rather than conquest and subjugation. The transition had not been easy. Many hegemony worlds had descended into chaos when their central government collapsed. Others had tried to continue fighting only to discover that human intelligence networks had infiltrated their military structures so thoroughly that resistance was futile. A few had attempted to negotiate separate peace treaties, hoping to preserve some fragment of their former power. But President Minji had made it clear from the beginning that there would be no separate deals and no return to the old ways. The Age of Galactic Empire was ending, and it would be replaced by something entirely new. The Human Colonial Alliance does not seek to replace the hegemony as the galaxy's dominant power, President Minji had announced in her first address to the former hegemony worlds. "We propose instead a confederation of free species, each maintaining their independence while cooperating for mutual benefit and protection." Taemin had watched that speech from his temporary quarters on New Busan, where he was being held along with other captured hegemony officers. He had expected to be executed or imprisoned for life, but Director Jisoo had made him an unexpected offer. "We need people who understand how the hegemony functioned," she had told him. "People who can help us establish peaceful relations with your former territories and prevent the outbreak of civil wars or resource conflicts." "You want me to betray my own people?" he had asked. "I want you to help save them," she had replied. "The hegemony is finished, Commander. The question is whether its collapse leads to decades of chaos and suffering, or whether we can build something better from the ruins." In the end, Taemin had accepted her offer, not because he believed in human ideals, but because he had seen what happened to species that continued to resist after their defeat was obvious. The humans were surprisingly merciful to those who cooperated, but they were utterly ruthless in suppressing any attempts to restart the old system of conquest and domination. Now he served as a liaison between the new Confederation government and the scattered remnants of hegemony leadership. It was not the role he had imagined for himself when he first put on a military uniform, but it was better than the alternatives. The work was difficult and often frustrating. Many of his former colleagues refused to accept that their civilization had been fundamentally outmaneuvered by a species they had dismissed as primitive. They clung to fantasies of reconquest and revenge, unable to understand that the galaxy had changed permanently. "They still believe we can return to the old ways," Taemin reported to Jisoo during one of their regular meetings. "Admiral Korveth is trying to organize resistance cells on the Outer Rim worlds. General Vex refuses to acknowledge the legitimacy of the Confederation government." Jisoo nodded, making notes on her datapad. "We expected this. Change is never easy, especially for those who benefited from the previous system. How are the moderate factions responding?" "Better than expected," Taemin admitted. "Governor Telvac has agreed to implement the new trade protocols on his worlds. Commander Zenth is cooperating with our efforts to establish refugee resettlement programs. They understand that cooperation offers more benefits than resistance. The refugee situation had been one of the most challenging aspects of the transition. The collapse of the hegemony had left millions of beings displaced from their homes, either because their worlds had been devastated by fighting, or because they had been living on conquered territories that were now seeking independence. The Human Colonial Alliance had established massive relief operations to help these refugees find new homes, but the logistics were staggering. Entire populations needed to be relocated, fed, housed, and integrated into new societies. It was exactly the kind of humanitarian crisis that the old hegemony would have ignored or exploited. But the humans seemed determined to help everyone, even their former enemies. "Director," came a voice from the communication system. It was Captain Minho of the Iron Lotus. "We have received a priority message from the Outer Rim Council. 3 systems have formally requested membership in the Confederation." Jisoo smiled. "That brings our total to 47 member systems. The idea is spreading faster than we projected." Taemin watched her work with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. The human approach to governance was completely unlike anything he had experienced under the hegemony. Instead of ruling through fear and force, they seemed to genuinely care about the welfare of every species under their protection. It should have been a sign of weakness. In Taemin's experience, compassion was a luxury that only the weak could afford, and it inevitably led to exploitation by more ruthless opponents. Yet somehow, the humans had built their entire civilization around these principles and had still managed to defeat the most powerful military force in the galaxy. "I still do not understand how you do it," he said during a quiet moment between meetings. "Do what?" Jisoo asked, looking up from her work. "Care about so many people who have nothing to offer you in return. The refugees, the former hegemony civilians, even prisoners like me. Under the old system, we would have been eliminated as soon as we were no longer useful." Jisoo considered his question carefully before answering. "Because we remember what it was like to be helpless," she said finally. "Every human alive today is descended from people who fled their homeworld as refugees. We know what it means to be at the mercy of others, to have no power and no protection except what strangers might choose to offer. But you are no longer helpless," Taemin pointed out. "You are the dominant military power in the galaxy. You could rule as the hegemony did." "We could," Jisoo agreed. "But we remember the lesson that your people forgot. Power without restraint inevitably leads to corruption and collapse. The hegemony fell because it became so focused on maintaining control that it stopped paying attention to the forces that were building against it." She activated a display showing the current state of the galaxy. The old hegemony territories were marked in fading red, while the growing confederation appeared in blue. But there were also green markers representing independent systems that had chosen to remain neutral, and yellow ones indicating species that were still deciding which path to follow. "We do not want to repeat your mistakes," Jisoo continued. "We want to build something that will last, something that species will choose to join because they see the benefits, not because they fear the consequences of refusal." Over the following months, Taemin watched this philosophy play out across the galaxy. The Human Colonial Alliance kept its promises, providing aid without strings attached and respecting the independence of species that chose to remain neutral. They negotiated rather than demanded, offered partnership rather than subjugation, and always seemed to prefer peaceful solutions to military ones. It should not have worked. Every principle of galactic politics that Taemin had learned during his military career suggested that such an approach would lead to chaos and rebellion, yet somehow it was succeeding. More systems joined the Confederation every month, attracted by the promise of security without oppression and prosperity without exploitation. The final test came when a coalition of former hegemony hardliners attempted to launch a counter-revolution. Led by Admiral Corveth and backed by several militaristic species that had benefited most from the old system, they declared their intention to restore the natural order of galactic civilization. Taemin expected the humans to respond with overwhelming force, crushing the rebellion before it could gain momentum. Instead, President Minji made a public offer to negotiate with the rebel leaders, promising amnesty for any who chose to lay down their arms peacefully. They will see this as weakness, Taman warned during an emergency planning session. Corvette believes that your compassion makes you vulnerable to those willing to use violence. Perhaps, Admiral Sungmin replied calmly. But we have learned that there are two ways to end a rebellion. You can kill all the rebels, or you can address the concerns that drove them to rebel in the first place. The negotiation process was long and difficult. Corvette and his allies had legitimate grievances about the pace of change and the fate of their species under the new system. But they also clung to the belief that military strength was the only currency that mattered in galactic politics. In the end, it was a former hegemony officer who convinced them to surrender. General Vex, who had initially refused to acknowledge the Confederation government, stood before the rebel assembly and spoke words that Taman would remember for the rest of his life. I have spent my entire career believing that power comes from the ability to destroy your enemies, Vex said. But I have learned something from watching these humans. True power comes from the ability to turn your enemies into allies. The rebellion collapsed within days. Most of the rebel forces accepted the offered amnesty and began the process of integration into the new galactic order. A few diehards continued to resist, but they found little support.